Few stories in business history are as dramatic as the rise, fall, and return of Steve Jobs to Apple Inc. It is a story about ambition, ego, innovation, failure, and redemption. It is the story of how a young visionary built a revolutionary company, lost control of it, and then returned more than a decade later to rescue it from the brink of collapse. When people talk about legendary business comebacks, they often refer to sports teams, political figures, or celebrities. But the comeback of Steve Jobs stands in a category of its own, because this was not just a comeback. It was the rescue of a company that was only months away from disappearing forever. To understand the significance of Jobs' return, we have to go back to the beginning. In the 1970s, personal computers barely existed. Computers were large machines owned by governments, universities, and corporations. The idea that ordinary people would own a computer at home seemed almost absurd, but two young men in California believed otherwise. Those two men were Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. In 1976, working out of a garage, they created the first Apple computer. Their goal was simple but revolutionary: build computers that ordinary people could use. That small startup quickly became Apple Inc. Within a few years, Apple introduced the Apple II, one of the first successful personal computers. The company grew at an incredible pace, turning into one of the fastest-growing companies in the United States. Then came the product that would change the technology world forever. In 1984, Apple launched the Macintosh. The Macintosh was groundbreaking because it introduced a graphical user interface and a mouse to mainstream consumers. Instead of typing complicated commands, people could click icons on a screen. Today, this seems normal, but in 1984, it felt like science fiction. The Macintosh launch was accompanied by one of the most famous advertisements in history: the legendary 1984 commercial. The commercial portrayed Apple as a rebel fighting against conformity in the computer industry. But behind the scenes, the company was heading toward a crisis. Steve Jobs was brilliant, visionary, and inspiring, but he was also intense, demanding, and difficult to work with. Inside Apple, tensions grew between Jobs and the company's leadership. At the center of this conflict was Apple's CEO, John Sculley. Sculley had originally been recruited by Jobs himself from Pepsi. Jobs famously asked him a question that would become legendary: "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or come with me and change the world?" Sculley accepted the challenge and joined Apple. But the partnership between Jobs and Sculley eventually collapsed. Jobs wanted Apple to move faster, take bigger risks, and focus on revolutionary products. Sculley and the board believed the company needed stability and structure. The disagreement grew into a power struggle. In 1985, the Apple board sided with Sculley. Steve Jobs was stripped of authority and effectively pushed out of the company he founded. He was just 30 years old. Imagine building a company from nothing, turning it into a global brand, and then being forced out of it. For Jobs, it was devastating. But it also became the most important turning point of his life. After leaving Apple, Jobs did something unexpected. Instead of disappearing, he started again. He created a new company called Next. Next was focused on building advanced computers designed for universities and research institutions. The machines were beautifully designed and technologically advanced, but they were expensive and difficult to sell. Commercially, Next struggled. However, the software created by Next was extraordinary. The Next operating system would later become one of the most important pieces of technology in Apple's future. Around the same time, Jobs made another decision that seemed strange at the time. He purchased a small animation studio from Lucasfilm. That studio became Pixar. At first, Pixar struggled financially, but eventually the company produced the first fully computer-animated feature film in history: Toy Story. The movie was a massive success. Pixar quickly became one of the most influential animation studios in the world. While Jobs was building Pixar and Next, something very different was happening at Apple. The company was losing its direction. During the early 1990s, Apple released dozens of confusing products: multiple versions of the Macintosh, printers, experimental devices, handheld assistants. The strategy became chaotic. Meanwhile, competitors were growing stronger. The biggest competitor was Microsoft. Microsoft's Windows operating system was spreading rapidly across the PC industry. Companies like Dell, Compaq, and HP were selling millions of Windows computers. Apple's market share began to shrink. Leadership inside Apple also became unstable. CEOs came and went. Strategies changed constantly. Product lines expanded instead of simplifying. By the mid-1990s, Apple was losing billions of dollars. Many analysts believed the company would soon go bankrupt. By 1996, Apple was desperate. The company needed a modern operating system. Its existing software was outdated and could not compete with Windows. Apple began searching for solutions. After evaluating several options, Apple made a surprising decision. The company would acquire Next. The purchase cost about $400 million. But the real value of the deal wasn't just the software. It was the return of Steve Jobs. When Jobs first came back to Apple in 1996, he wasn't CEO. He was only an advisor. But the situation inside Apple was worse than expected. The company was bleeding money. Products were failing. Morale was collapsing. Investors had lost confidence. Within months, Apple's leadership began to unravel. In 1997, the CEO stepped down. Steve Jobs stepped in as interim CEO. He called himself the iCEO. Jobs immediately began making radical changes. One of his first moves was to simplify Apple's product line. At the time, Apple had dozens of confusing products. Jobs reduced everything to 4 core categories: consumer desktop, consumer portable, professional desktop, professional portable. Everything else was canceled. Employees were shocked. But the strategy worked. Apple became focused again. Then came another unexpected decision. In 1997, Steve Jobs announced a partnership with Microsoft. Yes, the same Microsoft that Apple fans had considered the enemy. Microsoft agreed to invest $150 million in Apple and continue producing Microsoft Office for the Mac. The announcement stunned the audience at Apple's conference. But it reassured investors that Apple would survive. Next came a new focus on design. Jobs believed technology should not only be powerful, it should also be beautiful and simple. In 1998, Apple launched the product that would begin its comeback, the iMac. The iMac looked nothing like other computers. It had a colorful, translucent shell. It was easy to set up, and it was designed for the internet era. The iMac became a massive hit. Apple returned to profitability, but Steve Jobs wasn't finished. In 2001, Apple introduced a device that would change music forever, the iPod. The iPod allowed people to carry thousands of songs in their pocket. Combined with Apple's iTunes store, it revolutionized the music industry. Apple was no longer just a computer company. It was becoming a digital lifestyle brand. Then came the biggest transformation of all. In 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage and introduced the device that would change the world, the iPhone. The iPhone combined a phone, an internet device, and a music player into one product. It completely redefined the smartphone industry. Competitors were caught off guard. Entire industries were reshaped. A few years later, Apple launched another groundbreaking product, the iPad. The iPad created a new category of computing between smartphones and laptops. By this point, Apple had transformed from a struggling company into one of the most valuable companies on Earth. And it all began with the return of the founder who had once been fired. Steve Jobs' comeback remains one of the greatest stories in business history. It shows that failure is not the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of something even greater. Jobs once said, "I'm convinced that about half of what separates successful entrepreneurs from the non-successful ones is pure perseverance." Few stories prove that better than his. The man who was forced out of Apple returned to rebuild it. The company he saved went on to reshape technology, media, communication, and modern life itself. And it all started in a garage, with 2 young dreamers who believed computers could change the world.